Hello, everybody. It's Simone Collins here, and I'm so glad to see you here today. I am taking over this podcast.
Oh, no, it's been taken over.
Yeah, because I am going to lead the discussion today. I've decided not to phone it in, and we are going to talk today about a new pronatalist book that came out called What Are Children For?, which is basically the left's attempt at pronatalism. It is a book that we were just told about by a friend at a conference, and she basically explained it as this is the pronatalist argument, but from the perspective of an educated Brooklyn elite who's highly progressive.
Yeah, well, they got like an opinion piece in the New York Times, for example.
Yeah, it got an opinion piece in the New York Times. It got a write-up in the New Yorker, obviously, and they would never even consider giving us.
We've reached out to them before. They don't.
No, they don't talk to us, but they do talk to them because this was co-written by two of their people. And so obviously we're super excited to read this book because, oh my gosh, maybe because we cannot apparently speak to pronatalism in a way that gets progressives excited, maybe two progressive pronatalists could speak to progressives in a way that gets them excited. And so they did. And so I read the book. And okay, let me just start off by giving you the book's description, Malcolm. And I want to get your impression because I've read the book. Malcolm has not. Let's see what you think. So this is What Are Children For? On Ambivalence and Choice by Anastasia Berg and Rachel Wiseman. It came out on June 11th. So right now, only like 3 reviews have been written about it. It's very new. Here's the description. Becoming a parent, once the expected outcome of adulthood, is increasingly viewed as a potential threat to the most basic goals and aspirations of modern life. We seek self-fulfillment. We want to liberate women to find meaning and self-worth outside the home. And we wish to protect the planet from the ravages of climate change. Weighing on the pros and cons of having children, millennials and Zoomers are finding it increasingly difficult to judge in favor. With lucid argument and passionate prose, Anastasia Berg and Rachel Wiseman offer the guidance necessary to move beyond uncertainty. The decision whether or not to have children, they argue, is not just a woman's issue, but a basic human one. And at a time when climate change worries threaten the very legitimacy of human reproduction, Berg and Wiseman conclude that neither our personal nor collective failures ought to prevent us from embracing the fundamental goodness of human life, not only in the present, but in choosing to have children in the future. So what do you think of this description?
Would you like to know more?
What's your impression here?
I mean, that it is what you said it is. It is pronatalism, and progressives are screwed. If they can't figure out a pronatalist cultural subfaction, their entire value system is going to go extinct.
Yeah.
And a lot of people look at us and they think that we're like secretly trying to save the progressives or something like that. I would like some aspect of their culture to survive, but I don't want them to have the cultural dominance they have now. I think that they've shown that they basically become Nazis whenever they gain cultural power and they start dividing humans by ethnic group. And
I'm going to say a lot of the things that progressives fight for, that they say they want, pluralism, freedom of lifestyle, etc., are things that we very much support. It's just that in terms of what they actually allow for and support, progressives don't tend to do that in practice today.
Yeah, in a way that aligns with our values.
And that's what you're talking about. We actually do care about progressive values, but the progressive movement now does not actually support those values. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. It's wild that this has become the case. I think the parties have flipped, basically, with Trump. But anyway, so the interesting thing as a person like me is hearing you read this and seeing your reaction to this. And you guys haven't had to live with Simone while she was reading this.
Oh, no, we're going to go over all these things and you're going to react to all my little bits. I have all these little things I can share with you about the book, but I'm just getting your impression on the description as provided by the publishers.
I feel like I've just been read like Miranda writes, this is about to, like, that was a trigger warning for conservatives. That entire intro was a trigger warning for conservatives.
Okay. All right. I'll give you my TLDR because you say you should never bury the lead in these videos. I read this book. It included things like literary analysis because that's apparently a necessary part of discussion of pronatalism, which this is clearly why we're not convincing any progressives. We forgot the literary analysis
in this context.
What do you mean? Huh?
Explain literary analysis. I, as a listener, don't know what you mean by they did.
Okay, the authors literally talk about a series of books. There's one chapter where they just talk about books on motherhood that were written by various highfalutin fiction authors. And then there's another chapter where they talk about books that are about climate change and climate disasters. In fact, one of the reviews of this book complains about the fact that there were spoilers in the literary analysis. That was one of her primary complaints because she cared enough to actually go and read these books, which is, I think, also interesting. Reading all this literary analysis, it actually took me back to my high school days. And I realized that the reaction I had at the end of this book was very similar to the reaction I had after finishing The Grapes of Wrath, where you read that scene with the weird birth in the barn that was supposed to be like analogous to Jesus or something. And you're just like, what the fuck happened to me? Everything is terrible. And that is where I ended this book. What the fuck happened to me? And everything is terrible. And before I wanted to bring all my criticisms of the book to you and actually air them on this podcast, because I am very concerned about leaving a somewhat critical review of this book in video form without being justified in it. I went and looked at the other reviews to be like, am I crazy? This book basically leaves no reason to have kids. So the punchline to what are kids for or reasons for having kids, there are none. Bad.
Well, because I do not think you can justify above reproductive childbearing rates within a progressive moral framework.
Genuinely, it seems like what children are for is nothing. Children
it's
should
a
not...
book. No, but from what you told me, it's a book about why you may want one kid.
Not even that. I can't find justification in this book even for one kid. But anyway, it turns out the 3 reviews that exist so far, there's a total of 4, but one on Amazon was also published on Goodreads. All of them were by people who were sent the book by a publisher who clearly wanted them to post reviews. 2 of them are from mothers. One, a mother of 6. And I'll just read you from the one person who left a review as a member of the actual target audience, which is a progressive woman who does not yet have kids. Shannon Whitehead wrote, I appreciate the book's premise and liked it overall, but it's not the guide it bills itself as. The summary describes what are children for as, quote, an argument with, quote unquote, guidance on how to overcome parenthood ambivalence. However, it's more a collection of various people's thoughts on having children throughout history. The authors definitely add to these perspectives, but as someone who absolutely is the target audience for this book, I don't find much of what I would consider guidance or advice, which, okay, so I'm not crazy. Because part of me was like, oh, I'm just too dumb for this educated progressive view. Like, it's going over my head, the literary analysis.
Reading a cultural framework that we are not familiar with and may not pick up some of the nuances in. Like, if
that's what I thought.
Like Jewish literature, I'm not going to necessarily catch everything a Jewish person would catch.
Yes.
But here is, I think, what the book actually is. And I think that you are engaging with it incorrectly.
Okay.
I think that a progressive woman was thinking about having kids and then decided to do what was essentially a progressive literature review on the subject of having kids. Now, if you think like us, like you're some sort of a rationalist nerd and you're doing a literature review, you're going over all the research and everything like that. If you're a progressive and you're doing what is for them a cultural literature review, they are going over all of the thoughts anyone in the intellectual intelligentsia zeitgeist has had in modern times or in history about having kids. So this is like the arts literature review of what the intellectual intelligentsia has to say about the meaning of human life. And I think fundamentally what you and this other person took away from it is that they just don't have strong arguments for it. Because I think that the larger, so when we say the larger progressive ideology is fundamentally anti-natalist, I should probably explain what I mean by that. We argue that the urban monoculture, which is what progressivism largely is, it's this cultural framework that exists around the world, mostly concentrated in urban centers. It's a modern mimetic virus. You can look at our video, The Anatomy of the Urban Monoculture, if you want to go deeper on this. But its core draw is come to us and you won't have to experience any in-the-moment emotional suffering. And so this is where like trigger warnings come from. This is where the haze movement comes from. This is where like we're going to hand out meth on the streets comes from. Like these things make no sense if you are operating within most moral frameworks. That's why I bring them up. Like the idea of not telling somebody that eating too much is going to make them unhealthy and suffer in the long run doesn't make sense in most even like basic utilitarian frameworks. So you need this very strange moral set where like in the moment emotional pain is the ultimate negative. Trigger warnings, for example, fall into this as well. And there is the way that you resolve emotional pain in this framework is clearly remove humans. You remove humans, you remove emotional pain. Every additional human is just a being that might at some point experience emotional pain and therefore should not come into exist. And you also have this problem downstream of broad utilitarian frameworks. It's just less immediate, which is, say, if you take a broad utilitarian framework, but then lean heavily on the negative utilitarian side, which progressive culture definitely does. Like, it sees the fact that humans suffer as much more of a negative than the fact that they feel emotional good. There's not a way that you can motivate when telling a parent, if I'm telling them you need to have over X many kids, the argument I need to be presenting them with, and I think that the good book that does this is Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, Brian Capel. I think that's the book that has actually convinced a number of progressives. And he's actually been emailed. He's responsible for like at least 100 people that exist in the world today or more. But these are like the ones he knows about.
Yeah.
Because Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids engages with progressive culture as it really exists, which is a woman asking, how will having kids improve my life? The problem is that the kids often don't improve your life. That's not the point of kids. It's to give them a good life. And so when you have kids to improve your life, you end up with all of the stuff we talk about in our video about the parents who regret having kids and why this is a rising trend. I feel like the people who would be convinced by this book would end up regretting their decision to have kids. And you mentioned that at the end of the book, even the author seems to regret her decision.
Yeah, one of the two authors has a kid at the end of the book and describes her experience as a mother, and she sounds like a genuinely miserable mother who regrets having kids and is still extremely ambivalent about the choice to have kids and is trying to just be like, but it's meaningful, which is crazy. And I think what you're saying is right about them just doing a literature review of the experts when trying to evaluate this, but then not really finding anything that justifies it. Like, one mother who wrote a review says, this book has a lot of references to feminist text, often citing the works of Rachel Cusk and Sheila Heti. This provides the reader with additional materials to seek out and read more about direct experiences with motherhood and ambivalence. I don't necessarily think this book would be a directly helpful guide to those struggling with the decision to have children. While there is an exploration of different arguments, including climate change, not finding a suitable partner, financial concerns, and self-interest, there is perhaps obviously no direct path to coming to a conclusion for yourself. I would also say that the author's perspectives on motherhood seem to skew slightly negative, which is obviously not everyone's experience who chooses to have children. So even like other reviewers of the book who've been given free copies, presumably because they will write positive reviews, are kind of like, it's clear these women don't want to have children, which is crazy. And
this is the thing. I actually think that what this book is, and I think it's something we're going to see increasingly as the culture wars shift in the direction of pronatalism, is there is a faction of progressive women who will recognize that having kids is a moral good, like that their worldview, that everything we say, their worldview, their perspectives on reality are going to die out. This progressive cultural framework that they champion is slated for extinction right now. And therefore, from their perspective, it is a moral good to have kids. Mm-hmm. And now they need to come up with a logical structure that can motivate this decision that they've reached at from a logical deduction from their higher order moral framing. The problem is that there is no real or good logical framework that motivates kids in a progressive worldview.
I think something else at play is that intuitively, I think a lot of progressive women really want to have children, and yet the culture they've adopted prevents them from enjoying it. And the lifestyle that they choose and the approach to parenting that they feel they have to take prevents them from enjoying it. When I read the final chapter where one of the authors describes her experience as a parent of a young girl, it's clear that she could have had a good experience as a mother, but the way that she chooses to raise her daughter and the fact that she only has one child actually makes it just really hard and stressful and a fairly miserable experience. But let's go ahead. I wanted to discuss with you, because I think this is something interesting, some of the central themes and claims of the book. Yeah. There are 3. So I'm going to read them off to you, and then you can tell me what your thoughts are on them, because I think that these are the core things with which you and I would probably disagree. And I found it quite interesting. So one central claim and theme is that either going back to or creating a hard culture is impossible. That's a big thing. And of course, clearly we're of a
How
very
do they
different
present this argument? This is obviously
It
our
was
word.
it was explicitly discussed, but in a very offhand. And of course, we can't go back, and we also couldn't create a new one. It basically just said like that.
Oh, so they just offhandedly are like, you can't recreate.
Yeah, they're just like offhand. Of course, you couldn't just go back and create a new culture. It was that explicit. So I thought that was really interesting. That just basically zero, and that the pithiness with which that was expressed demonstrates the extent to which they've given very little thought.
I actually think that this is really important because you need to ask, like, why didn't they say that could be a solution, like altering their cultural framework? And the answer is because you could not stay within the urban monoculture if you created a side cultural group that would be seen as a threat to it. So they literally can't. Like, if they did
struggled herself to sleep, by the way. Oh, no, you're awake again. Sorry. Carry on.
If that is so sweet. If she did present it, God, I don't remember what I was saying there. Looking at the kid.
If they did develop a hard culture, they by definition wouldn't be progressive anymore, which is a big deal.
Yeah, it's funny. That's basically what we did. We were then ended up developing a hard culture, and are like, okay, now we are more
no Puritan
framework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's another very pervasive theme, and I think this is especially crucial, which is that the authors and the readers of this book, and basically every woman whose perspective they mention in their literary analysis, in all of their other references, lack an objective function. We define an objective function as basically a few or just one thing of inherent value that you yourself have chosen to optimize your life around. It is the thing you're seeking to maximize. And it could be the well-being of all humankind. It could be the well-being of all sentient animals and beings. It could be serving God. It could be having fun. It could be whatever, right? No one reading or writing this book has an objective function. And this is the very source of that ambivalence about parenthood, because as soon as you have an objective function and then an ideology on how you're going to maximize that thing or those things that you're going to maximize in your life, you have an answer as to whether or not you're going to have kids. Period.
Yeah. Because you're like, this is what I'm optimizing for. By the way, if you don't have an objective function and you are interested in developing one yourself without a lot of bias, read The Pragmatist Guide to Life. We wrote that during a time in our life where we were much less ideologically biased than we are now. And I think it is as close as a true neutral resource for finding an objective function.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just to clarify objective function in other words as to what you're saying, it is a moral framework for interacting with reality, i.e. this is what I think is good, this is what I think is bad, and at what measures do you think those things are truly good and bad, and then you can just use that to plug into a moral equation when you're making individual decisions. Should I have kids? But I also would say the answer, if you're like, if you're genuinely like, how do I morally justify having kids? Like, you're in this progressive culture, the actual argument I would most use is to say, you're doing it for them and not you. Don't think about you or society or anything like that. This is an entire human who's going to live 100 years or 80 years, who knows, with technology being what it is now, who's going to experience an entire life. And you can create this multiplicatively based on the level of sacrifice you're willing to make. How much are you willing to sacrifice to give other humans the chance to live? And then you could say, oh, but then I could take the money into whatever and just give it to people in Africa or whatever, right? Yeah, but those people are different from you. They're culturally different from you. They're genetically different from you. They're not going to experience the same type of life your child would be experiencing. So you are exchanging one of those lives for another one of those lives. Here is where progressives can't come up with an answer to this. They would then say, yes, but all lives are exactly equal. And I might be like, that might be true from a universal perspective, but that is not true from a parent's perspective. Your child's life as a parent is not equal to every other child on the world. I'm telling you that in absolute sense. The parent who says that my child's life is equal to a random child growing up in another country, I'd say nope. And there's probably something emotionally wrong with you if you think that. Because even if at a universal perspective, all human lives may be equal, we do disproportionately value ideologically even, the lives of those who are closer to us than the lives of those who are further from us. And it is one of those lives that you are creating with the sacrifice, but the progressive moral framework doesn't allow them to say that. So you can't really pierce with this argument. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. So the third element and core premise of this book is that the authors and pretty much everyone that they're describing as well are raised by parents who are in soft or super soft cultures, or even parents who themselves were raised by parents of soft cultures. So we are seeing either one or two generations in to soft or super soft cultures. And I think that's also really important, is that these people predominantly were raised by also people who were not from hard cultures. And that definitely shows. There are just a few exceptions in the book, but I think that's important to note, is that at this juncture in society, it's not that like people for the first time are going soft. It's that we're seeing multiple generations into soft culture.
Yeah, when we abandoned the religious systems that we co-evolved with, a lot of people, I think, expected the majority of the effect of this abandonment to happen in the generation that was abandoning these systems.
Exactly.
But it turns out most of the
there's a certain amount of inertia.
Yeah, there's inertia, but also I think most of the benefits of these systems are actually transmuted during childhood. So even if, for example, and I see this with Mormons, we've talked about it in other videos, even if a Mormon leaves the faith, if I interact with them and they were raised in a Mormon household, I can immediately tell that they were raised in a Mormon household. Like the way they interact is very different than the way other people interact. And it's generally more emotionally healthy than the way other people interact, whether they stayed in the faith or stayed out of the faith. And I say this as a non-Mormon, so this is me just elevating. Also true with Jews I've met. Jews who grew up in religiously observant households, even if they've left, typically have that vibe as adults and are more emotionally healthy and stuff like that. You don't begin to see the mental breakdown that comes from leaving a hard tradition that you were raised in until you get to the generation that was raised in their childhood without even that tradition.
That's right.
In what these people look like from the perspective of society, when you see them, when you interact with them, is like a robot that's like short-circuiting. The book feels, from what Simone was telling me in terms of reading it, is like the active breakdown of progressive culture in real time. So derived from any sort of hard cultural framework that makes demands of an individual, that expects discipline, whether it is external discipline or self-discipline on an individual. That's why progressives freak out at us. As we've said, that's why they freak out at Starship Troopers. This world, you should watch our Starship Troopers videos, that is totally equal, ruled by a Black African female, Sky Marshal Tahatma rule. The entire planet is, where all the genders are the same in the shower. What's the one thing that's different? What's the one thing that makes it the fascist dystopia to them? That you are expected to do something. You are expected to sacrifice something yourself for the rest of humanity if you are going to take on a role in terms of deciding the future of that society, i.e. voting. And when you completely remove discipline from individuals' lives and the expectation of sacrifice from individuals' lives, and you do this intergenerationally, you get this short-circuiting and static, which I think is what this book is. And I would encourage, if our words end up being remembered in the future, because I don't think this book's going to end up doing very well given the number of reviews it has so far and stuff like that. We're
doing our best to promote it right now, by the way.
Yeah, we're doing our best to promote it.
I know, for example, that at least one of the listeners of this podcast was present with me at Manifest when we were told by another woman, a friend of ours, that, about this book. And she said, this is great. This is exactly what I need, because she herself is progressive and she wanted to hear this argument. So even people watching this podcast are the target audience for this book. And I am here to promote it. We were going to have the authors on, but that the follow-up and connection never took place. Y'all are welcome, by the way, to come on and talk about this with us.
Hold on, I have to finish this statement. When you future anthropologists are trying to understand how progressive culture, how the dominant culture in the world, the first culture that basically ruled the entire world through the UN, through the American government, how did it suddenly kill itself within one generation? This book will hold the keys to their way of seeing reality that you in the future are no longer able to model.
Yeah. Anyway, some positives. I learned some things that I didn't expect from the book. For example, they cited one study, which I had not come across, that found that many women freezing eggs are not in highly paid careers. They just needed to separate fertility constraints from finding the right partner. And I think that's quite interesting. We might even do a whole podcast on this because they pointed out that one of the major constraints, of course, is actually finding the right partner. And someone who listens to this podcast had pointed out to you, Malcolm, I think, that really what we should be promoting isn't having kids, but just actually having a wholesome, healthy marriage, because that is the bottleneck in so many of these cases.
I think we do that through our interactions as we show and we model a possibility that I think a lot of people are just unaware of. And I would say for the women who are doing this is the problem, because I've talked to these women, okay, and they're not finding good partners. There are a lot of good men out there looking for a wife right now. They are not finding good partners because, two, they are using as a benchmark for the type of partners that they can get as the type of partners who, while polyamorous, will date them. Look, lady, let me tell you what. If a guy is dating 4 other women and he's also dating you, or he's dating you, but he's saying, I'm not going to be exclusive with you. Of course, I'm going to be dating other women. That person is going to be a much higher quality male than you can secure within a monogamous market. Yeah. That's just clear. Like, you will not get that. You need to be dating like 3 or 4.
Well, and also, if you have a child with that man, his value on the market will plummet, and suddenly
sometimes to cure him. So do be aware of that. That is a pretty good gambit that we've mentioned in another podcast. Yeah. The other thing I'd say is a lot of these women are looking for progressive men, and there are 2 progressive women for every 1 progressive man. I do not think that most progressive men are emotionally healthy. They're generally like psychological wrecks who are like seeing a psychologist every week. So yeah, sorry, I know we're not supposed to shame seeing a psychologist anymore, but the modern iteration of psychology is just so harmful. So to these women, you got to break out of that. You got to break out of that mindset, because that is not where you're going to find the good guys.
I also did not know that women try to weaponize their fertility.
Tell me about this.
By saying that they'll refuse to have kids or out of protest because others, such as family members, are not doing enough to fight climate change, or they're like not voting Democrat. And there are groups like Birth Strike and No Future Children that...
Oh, we need to look these up.
I know. We need to maybe do a whole episode on those. I did learn some interesting things. The reasons that they presented for not having kids are pretty much all the typical reasons you'd expect. Being forced to compromise their careers, which is totally fair. I think that's a huge reason to not have kids. That's why I said I wasn't going to have kids. Not finding a suitable partner, high cost, concerned about not being able to give the kids the same upbringing they received, like going to college without going into debt. Then, of course, there's just the typical negative utilitarianism, climate change, and then just misery being a parent. And I think that's due to the unreasonable expectations.
This is actually really interesting, is the idea of a fertility strike. So fertility strikes only work on your genetic relatives. And yet progressives don't seem to understand this. There was that case in Canada that we did the joke on that I'll play here.
Oh, good, look, your friends are here. Hey!
You're supposed to want to have children, and this is your ultimate goal in life. It is a very archaic idea, an old idea and representation of a woman.
So you're getting people to sign a pledge basically saying that they will not have children until the Canadian government takes serious action on climate change.
Is that your blood? Well, no, it's college kid blood.
And how many people have signed on so far?
1,381 as of right now.
I know what this is. This is a suicide pact.
Oh my God, that makes so much sense.
We have got to hide all of the sharp objects.
If only I was born with a vagina.
Yeah, we can solve that problem.
Amen, sister.
Holy Mother of God! Some kid, he just hooked himself right into the wood chipper. What? Head first right into the wood chipper. It looked like it might have been one of the college kids.
Where they tried to do a fertility strike for climate change, like a bunch of young women. And I'm like, okay, me as somebody who doesn't care about climate change, I'm glad you're leaving the gene pool, right? Like the people who already care about climate change, they're the people who you're appealing to is this, right? And so presumably you can't get them to vote more Democrat than they're already voting, right? So they don't matter. Like the metric of similarity to yourself that you are demarcating here is the metric that decides your enemies and allies. So you're not really pushing anyone. So why would women think that this would work? And it is because they view the world with a completely socialist mindset. They genuinely believe that all children belong to the state and not to the family, not to the cultural group. And because of that, they believe that a progressive woman threatening to not have kids is going to motivate a, for example, conservative man to change his perspective, when I'm just like, okay, good riddance. I would be the worst, Noah. As I've ever said, the fairies and the unicorns, they're like, I hate you and I'm not getting on the raft. And I'd be like, give them the bird, go on the raft. I'm like, I don't care. You guys can drown. And that's really where we are right now, is a lot of groups react angrily when you point out the truth that if people like them cannot motivate fertility, they're going to disappear in the future. Yeah.
There was also some butthurt in the book that just got me angry. They were complaining that egg freezing and IVF is tough because there are needles and you can't have sex during the egg freezing round. And I'm like just the sheer amount of, and they also didn't point out, they pointed out a little bit of how expensive it is, but it bothered me. And then they also argue, of course, that women can't have it all. And I think that goes back to this major issue of people who read this book and wrote this book did not have objective functions, because you can have it all if you know what you care about. You can have all that you care about if you choose what you care about, because then you know there are two different versions of having it all. There's having it all with an objective function, where I literally have it all, but I have many of the things that people would want if they don't have an objective function that they don't have. For example, we don't do a ton of travel internationally anymore, obviously, because we have kids. We don't eat out. I don't buy a lot of stuff. So I don't have it all in those ways, but also those are not things I care about. I literally have everything that I care about. And that's great. And I think that's how a lot of other mothers feel who have objective functions, is they know exactly what they want. They know exactly what doesn't matter to them. And they're able to have everything that they want because it's actually not that much. And that's why I think it's so important to have an objective function. But yeah, so to the point of literary analysis, it was actually within the literary analysis portion of the book that I inadvertently came across what I thought was their most clever way of convincing progressive women.
Oh, tell me.
To want to have children. I told you this when I just listened to that portion of the audiobook. They described this one, it sounded like a complete nightmare of a book about it seemed like partially or mostly trans polycule and like their journey into motherhood. And although maybe not motherhood, I think maybe there was an abortion in there. It just sounded like the ultimate progressive fiction book. But they described this one character who was a trans woman who desperately wanted to experience true motherhood. And it really brought across the privilege that women experience in being able to be mothers. And the fact that there are all these trans women who would genuinely, if you're a real trans woman, right? And like, you just desperately want to be a woman, you desperately want to be a mother and you can't, you can just feel the entitlement, the spoiled rottenness of women in their ability to carry children, and then just complain about it and be like, how dare you expect me to have children, when there are people, both infertile women and like me, right? And trans women who take the same amount of estrogen that I do, apparently, who just desperately want to have children. And that was the one time reading this book where I was like, oh shit, yeah. Like
that argument would work on progressives. That actually would work on progressives. And it's interesting.
Like, yeah, like how dare trans women would die to be where you are. That was the most prenatalist argument in the entire book. So I thought that was very interesting. Wanted to point that out. Wrote, oh my God, these authors are overthinking themselves into abject misery. No wonder university educated women are not having kids. Yeah, that's really how I felt through a lot of this. I think overthinking is a central theme here. And especially in the literary analysis, there's these descriptions of either books describing, I think it's books describing this with feminist authors saying, oh, when I was breastfeeding my child, I like felt this miasma of whatever. And there are just these women who are overthinking it so much, and they clearly don't have anything else that they're doing. And this is why you shouldn't take maternity leave, because you're just going to go completely crazy. And it bothers me how much overthinking there is in this process. And they also argue in the book, and this is a big thing that bothers me about progressives and conversations around pronatalism, is that girls are taught from a very young age that motherhood is their destiny, and that we live in a pronatalist world, and that women are pressured to have children. Because until I met you and you talked with me about children, was antinatalist. I planned on never having children. And I was never shamed for that. I was never questioned for that.
So they claim that women are being shamed for being...
They claim, and I've seen this done before by people who make antinatalist arguments, that women, that we live in this pronatalist world where they're shamed for being child-free and they're shamed for not having kids. But I was in their position. I never felt questioned. And actually, I felt quite judged when I wanted to have kids, even by my own parents, who were, oh, you're going to be a better.
They were like, what are you guys doing? Why are you having so many kids?
Oh, no, but at least my mother was like, oh, Malcolm, you're going to be such a great parent. And then she like turned to me and was like,
yeah, to one kid. Your mom was very clear. We're going to have one kid.
One kid. Yeah, after fertility.
My mom began, because your mom died before we had more than one kid, but my mom started freaking out at 2 kids. She said, you need to stop. You need to stop.
Then she gave up, though. She got zen about it.
No, she said 4 was the perfect number and we needed to stop at 4. I know she's a fan of the show and everything like that, and the first fan of the show, really, who really was watching it daily. But I don't think she could deal with the press we're getting these days.
No.
Emotionally, she wouldn't be able to deal with it, and I would likely have to pull back or something like that. Agents of Providence act as they act, right? We are able to move as far as we can. And we actually saw that in her like notes after she died, that one of her dreams was that we got famous. But that couldn't happen in a world where we also weren't so attacked that you just can't be famous without being hated these days.
Yeah.
If you look at younger celebrities that are rising through the ranks. And that's one of the problems with this progressive mindset, is it is a desire to conform at the same time as to have pride in who you are and what makes you different. And that's especially where those things aren't from progressive culture, i.e. the random things that turn you on, but your cultural background, your family's background. And pride in anything that is not granular in the progressive world is sin, which is so interesting that you are allowed to be as prideful as you want about the random things that turn you on, but having pride in your culture or your religion or your ethnicity, those things are seen as core sins in progressivism. And they must do that because all of those things represent alternate cultural frameworks that could compete with their own.
Yeah, so anyway, I came away from this book feeling pretty disheartened, because I thought, okay, clearly we're not getting through to progressive groups in terms of making a strong prenatalist argument. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back. Progressives don't think we're getting through to them, but we are, because I'm noticing, for example, when we've gone viral twice in British publications for whatever reason, Young Turks has done a segment on the piece that goes viral. And the first time they went in on us to attack us, they're like, wow, they're like these monsters. They did not acknowledge demographic collapse as an issue. Second time, they're like, obviously demographic collapse is an issue and pronatalism is important, but like these motherfuckers are doing it in a super evil, bad way. Like they're terrible people. And I think the important thing is that we are raising awareness, and we're getting a subset of progressives to be like, oh yeah, it's an issue and I hate these guys, but I care about this and I'm going to do something about it. I actually think our advocacy is doing a good job. I think doubling down on the reasons not to have kids, which is what this book does, is quite, as much as it speaks to the antinatalist sentiment of the progressive movement, it's not solving the problem. And as the other reviewers stated, it's not giving a real practical framework. Now, I welcome either or both of the authors to come on and talk with us about this and give a defense for the book. And perhaps because I'm too low IQ to actually catch the message that is inspiring women who read this book to have kids, Explain what I missed and dumb it down for.
Yeah, what's the specific arguments? That's what we want to know. Like, it's
dumb it down for me.
A meditation on children and motherhood. And I actually think this is the core thing where progressives fail at this, is when they focus on children, they narcissistically focus on motherhood instead of focusing on humanity.
And actually, that is what, when our friend told me about the book, that's what I thought it was going to be about. Because the way that she explained it to me was that it tries to take all the arguments that progressives are using for not having kids, such as the environment, such as negative utilitarianism, and just allow people to look at the inherent question of, should I have kids? But that's not what it ultimately was about. So either she had not yet read the book, or
that's what I assume.
Yeah, maybe it had just come out. So I think she had an advanced copy. She literally had a physical hard copy with her.
Before she anticipated that it would address those issues, but maybe. But yeah, I don't think that those issues are, like, we address each of those in turn in the Pragmatist Guide to Crafting Religion, which is our pronatalism book. We have a section where we just go through every one of the progressive arguments, environmentalism, antinatalism, etc., and we give a logical counter to it. But the problem is that those are logical counters from first principle perspectives, which do not register with progressives.
I think you could also argue it's a very masculine take, right? So the approach that we take to problems is what the boyfriend does when he's not being a good boyfriend. When the girl comes to him and he's, she says, this terrible thing happened to me at work, and can you believe what he said? And the boyfriend's, obviously, what you should do is this. Here's how to solve the problem. And then she gets mad because what he was supposed to say was, oh my gosh, that's so horrible. You must feel terrible. Tell me more.
This book is a feelings circle.
I think that's what they're going for here is, yes, it's so expensive and your career is hampered and you're going to be miserable.
You are heard. You are heard. Valid.
Yes. And maybe, actually, you know what? I think we just figured it out. That's what this book is doing. It is doing the good boyfriend. It is being the good boyfriend of pronatalism.
And we are the bad boyfriend.
We're like, the bad boyfriend.
Shut up, bitch. This is how you handle it.
We're like, no, don't worry. I'll fix it for you. We mansplain. Okay, we are mansplaining. And this book is listening and acknowledging. And the readers are heard. They're definitely heard. Like, all of the progressive female concerns are aired ad nauseum in this. And that's it. But I think here's the problem is mansplaining and problem solving is still the correct pathway. And listening and saying, oh, this is so terrible, and you must feel so terrible. The boyfriend who does that is enabling a girlfriend to develop more neurosis, to not solve her problems, to establish learned helplessness. That good boyfriend behavior is toxic and ultimately abusive.
Simone, I love you to death. You are the best wife any man could hope for.
It's true though, right? And tell me I'm wrong.
No, but I'm the guy here. You're saying you are so right that I've never even seen somebody as right as you. You are the pick me of the already chosen.
I am the chosen. I am not a pick me. I am chosen.
I'm not a pick me. I am the chosen. Oh, that'd be great if there's a new group of women who call themselves the chosen instead of pick me.
Oh my God, yes.
You're like, I've already been chosen. I already have the kids.
Yeah.
I won this game. I'm in the post game.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Love you to death.
Would you mind getting the kids and then locking the fence, and then I'll make dinner while they play outside?
Will do.
Thank you. All right, little one, let's get you changed and get your dinner. You're awake now. You're awake now. Okay.